This walk, produced in partnership with Discover Huddersfield, features among different local events organised as part of this year's Heritage Open Days. So what should you expect? Although we won't be walking through actual physical locations, we believe using Google Earth with 3D views alongside historical images and maps will enable you to explore the heritage of Birkby from a new perspective. So please stay with us to find out more. We are keen to see your questions and comments during this program. To post comments on YouTube, you need to be signed in with a Google ID and post them on the right-hand side of the screen. Alternatively, you can contact us via this email showing at the bottom of the screen. And we will answer your questions at intervals or at the end of the walk. And now over to Lorna, who will provide a quick introduction to Birkby's history and topography.
Hello there. I'm just going to share my screen with you. There we go. And show you the route of our walk to get us started. Now, this shows the route in yellow, starting at St John's Church, travelling along St John's Road, Blacker Road, Birkby Lodge Road, Birkby Hall Road, and then a little wiggle, including 1 or 2 footpaths, before coming back to near the start. We've chosen just a selection of the many interesting sites that range from listed buildings to hidden corners. There are lots of places we could have included. So, to give us a bit of perspective, I'm going to share with you now a view of Birkby area looking towards Huddersfield and Castle Hill in the distance, without the Jubilee Tower on at this point. This photo was taken from Cowcliff Hill in the 1890s, early 1890s. And as you can see, well into the 1800s, Birkby was still mostly a rural area. There were a few clusters of houses and businesses, mostly centred at Bay Hall and at Lee Head, around where the Sphinx Nest pub is now. And there were streams, valleys, patches of woodland, and a few farms, such as Storth's Farm, which would be to the right of this picture. But gradually it was developing. In this picture, Clough House Mill is in the foreground, which some might remember as Middlemost Mill, or later as a supermarket site, Lodges and then Asda. And the mill pond is still there, hidden behind the modern housing estate. Bay Hall Mills is also visible in the landscape, to the left of St John's Church spire. And you can see some of the large grand terraces that had recently been built. Another picture shows you a view before the terraces were built here to the right on St John's Road. And the carts delivering soft drinks for Ben Shaw's, which we'll come back to later. So this was a time when there were mostly horses and carts and walking to get around, but Birkby was becoming a large residential suburb connected by new roads and public transport. Here you can see one of the trams. Huddersfield Corporation opened its first steam tram route in 1883 and was the first local municipality in the UK with its own tramway system, not a privately owned one. In fact, there is a Birkby tram shelter now at the National Tramway Museum in Derbyshire. By the start of the First World War, Birkby had all the amenities of a small town. There were shops, a cinema, 4 churches, pubs, a public park, and several major factories employing hundreds of local people. Housing development continued throughout the 20th century, and since the end of the Second World War, the growing migration from Europe, South Asia, and the Caribbean has made Birkby into the multicultural community we know today. And now I'm going to hand over to Frank to show the first 3 of the sites we've decided to focus on today.
Thank you very much, Lorna. And I think there was a little echo at the beginning, so we didn't get a chance to introduce you. So this is Lorna, my colleague, and we've got Stan Sagan in the background. Hello, Stan, helping us. So I will just jump straight to the first stop on our route, which is St. John's Church on St. John's Road. It'll come up in a second. St. John's, which is open for Heritage Open Days this year, by the way, was set in the fields and dominated every other building in the area when it opened, as well as now. It is still a major landmark. It was built in Anglican Gothic revival style between 1851 and 53 and was funded by the Ramsden family, who then owned most of Huddersfield. In fact, it is now 100 years since Huddersfield became the town that bought itself, and there will soon be events to celebrate this milestone. The church was designed by the renowned London-based architect William Butterfield, who also designed the vicarage behind. The builder, Joseph Kay, already in his 70s at that time, was also responsible for building many of the most well-known buildings in Huddersfield, including the Huddersfield Infirmary, George Hotel, and the iconic railway station. Mrs. Sunderland, the soprano from Brighouse, who was called the Yorkshire Queen of Song, sang at the ceremony when they laid the cornerstone in 1851. The Mrs. Sunderland Festival was later formed in her name in 1889. Another musical prodigy, Walter Parrott, who was only 12 at the time, played the harmonium at the stone-laying ceremony. He was a Huddersfield lad who later became Sir Walter Parrott and Queen Victoria's organist at Windsor.
I could mention here, Frank, that there's still a lovely organ in the church, and if people wanted to go, it's open tomorrow and Saturday. They're having people play the organ while you visit. It's lovely.
Oh, thank you very much, Lorna, for that plug for Heritage Open Days. So let's go and visit St. John's Church. And I should also mention that St. John's Road, connecting the area with the town, was laid out around the time when the church was built. Before that, there had just been a small track. And now I will drop down to a street level and show you a building with an interesting sign on it, which says Smoker's Corner.
It's one of these ghost signs, isn't it, Frank? They call them ghost signs, those.
Yeah, yeah. So, the buildings that you can see are quite old. This appears to have been the home of Bay Hall Labour Club, converted from stables. And Keir Hardie spoke there in January 1896 to a large audience about his visit to America. He became the first parliamentary leader of the Labour Party a decade later. There had been a cafe there for a long time. In 1956, it was the Rendezvous Cafe and sold sweets and tobacco. Some of you might remember it. The Hairdressers, which was one called Eclipse, has for a long time served the local African Caribbean community, along with another one in Blacker Road called Chic. And now I'll take you to our next site, which is just up the road and on Wheathouse Road, Hopkinson's. Here you can see the original admin block of what once was the huge Britannia Works, home to the Hopkinson's engineering factory. The firm was established in town in 1843 by Joseph Hopkinson and relocated several times. There was rocketing demand for its safety mountings and valves for mill boilers and other patented inventions. Right now, by 1904, when the 16-acre Birkby plant opened, Hopkinson's had already gained a worldwide reputation. The firm's products, things like steel castings and centrifugal separators, were exported globally and were vital for the development of UK's energy industry. And now I will take you into the bowels of the factory and show you a photo of the light machine shop from around 1920. And this photo here, from the same period, is of the shipping department. On this aerial photo from 1926, you can appreciate the vast size of the Britannia Works, surrounded by residential housing. Well, Hopkinson's provided work for hundreds of locals, and it became one of Huddersfield's largest employers with over 2,000 workers by the 1960s. Unfortunately, the decline of UK's manufacturing industry from the mid-70s onwards hit the firm too. Britannia Works was bought by the Glasgow-based Weir Group in 1989 and closed in 2005. It was later cleared for a residential estate. And this photo shows the wheat house, which is just opposite the admin block of the former Hopkinson's factory, and you can actually see the admin block, which have been made into flats right now. And so it's partly visible at an angle to the road, and might date from about 1750. The house gave its name to the new road that linked Bay Hall and Birkby Hall. And this photo shows it from the back, which gives you a better idea of its age. And thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Lorna, for taking it.
Yeah, thank you to the owner for letting me into the back garden to get a good image.
And this is one of the advantages of being on a virtual walk, is that you can actually get a proper insight into the areas you wouldn't normally be able to see if you walk the street. And now let me take you to the next site. So the way we would walk it, we would just go down a few hundred yards, get to the traffic light at the bottom of Wheat House Road, and then turn right, carry on up Blacker Road, and then we would reach what is today's Birkby Infant and Nursery School. This was once site of the Huddersfield Workhouse, dated back to the mid-1700s and built at an angle to the road. Workhouses were places of last resort for the able-bodied poor when they became ill or destitute, and as the 19th century wore on, they increasingly became refuges for the elderly, infirm and sick. The 1851 map I'm showing you now shows a rectangular building surrounded by cultivated grounds to the front and rear, and a separate block containing a washing house and a hospital. Well, the site was reported to be unfit for habitation in 1848, with Leeds Mercury claiming that typhus victims lay in overcrowded wards, often for weeks, on bags of straw or shavings crawling with lice, without a change of linen or bedclothes. This sounds very Dickensian.
Sounds awful, doesn't it, Frank? Horrible place.
But we shall soon discover that, as well as sheltering the poorest, Birkby was also inhabited by some very wealthy residents. However, after two new workhouses opened in the Huddersfield area, namely Dean House in 1862 and Crossland Moor in 1872, the outdated, horrible workhouse in Birkby was no longer needed. In 1873, soon after the formation of the Huddersfield Borough, it became the Borough Fever Hospital and admitted cases of infectious diseases such as smallpox, typhoid, and scarlet fever. In 1898, a new isolation hospital opened in Dalton, and so the Birkby Hospital was pulled down, and a new mixed school designed by borough engineer Kenneth F. Campbell opened here in 1911, providing education to 600 local children. Now, if we did the physical walk, we would carry on walking a few hundred yards and then turn right before the Spink's Nest, which was rebuilt on the site of a very old pub with the same name. There used to be an old settlement here called Lee Head, where a Brooke family lived in the 1500s. If you are walking up what is now Birkby Lodge Road, try to spot the stream which runs under the road. This is Clayton Dyke, although on this map, some of it is called Bay Hall Dyke, as it provided water for the mills at Bay Hall. And at this point, I'm going to ask Stan if there are any questions.
Well, there's only one question, and I'm just interested in the fact that it was called the Wheat House. And I know we probably don't know why, but I'm just a little bit of speculation about, was wheat such a rare thing to grow around here? Because I know it was mainly barley and rye on these northern hills of ours.
I'm just assuming that possibly it was to do with the production of wheat or the storage of wheat or the sale of wheat. There was a mill, an old mill that used to be on the corner of Spain's Road and Birkby and Halifax Old Road there at the top of where the park is. And I think they used to at one point mill grain as well as.
So you're talking about mill in the original.
Yeah, the old kind of mill that milled grain.
The old kind of mill. Of course, we forget that. Milling grain.
Yes, there was an old mill there near Spain's Road. And so there might have been a grain mill before there were weaving mills.
Okay, so I'm getting a picture of kind of a pre-industrial thing going on here. That's probably there for hundreds of years in one form or another. And then religion comes in, big status building, status terraces, were they for a while?
In the Victorian days.
Yes, and then we've got industry, and we've also got the workhouses so far. So thank you for that. Carry on.
Thank you very much. And over to Lorna, who will take you through the next steps of our journey.
Hi, I'm going to add my images to the stream now and show you the next stop just along Birkby Lodge Road, which is Birkby Lodge. Now you get quite a good 3D view from the air here. It was built in the 1840s of ashlar, this smooth stone, and in the early 1900s it was partly remodelled by the very well-known arts and crafts architect Edgar Wood, who worked on other houses nearby as well as in Manchester. He designed the extension to the west side with two-storey canted bays, these sort of angular bays, and he added a drawing room below and 2 bedrooms above. Nowadays, the house is rented on Airbnb, and there is some planning permission for new houses in the grounds, which is why it's been flattened there, and there's a new opening in the wall if you have a look on foot. If I look at an old map, it's quite interesting seeing it in context. This 1854 map shows Birkby Lodge just here to the right, and below Birkby Lane, as Birkby Lodge Road was then, it shows you Birkby Gardens, which were the types of gardens where you would promenade among the trees and flowers. They were pleasure gardens for people. It's where now there's George Avenue and Una Place. And also nowadays, to the left of Birkby Lodge along the footpath is Birkby Community Wildlife Garden, which started in 2017 on land that had been allotments and an old orchard. So local people are still enjoying nature and the outdoors, even though we don't have the big pleasure gardens now. This photo was taken in 1896, before Edgar Wood's alterations. And I want to mention now a few of the influential and wealthy people who used to live here. In fact, 2 of them were knighted. The Huddersfield banker, Sir Charles W. Sykes, died in the house in 1889. He was knighted for his part in introducing post office savings banks and encouraging people to save for hard times, so they wouldn't need to resort to workhouses. And this sales plan of 1896 shows that they had a fashionable billiard room, and just to the right of the building was a fashionable tennis court. The fancy gardens show a curved drive, which was common to the other grand houses in the area, giving the residents a bit of privacy. There were several other wealthy and influential residents, such as Joseph Armitage, whose family owned Millsbridge House and High Royd in Honley, and Sir Joseph Turner, who was knighted in 1920 and died there in 1939. He became managing director of the British Dyestuffs Corporation that had grown out of the Reed Holiday chemical firm. Now, later on, from 1944, Birkby Lodge was a guest house for the Hopkinsons firm, where they'd put up customers from UK and abroad. And in the 1960s, it became the firm's computer department. Later, it was a private hotel and restaurant for a while, and some people might remember visiting and enjoying the lovely wood panelling inside. If you zoom out slightly, the more modest terraced houses across the road here also have these prominent gables and double height bay windows. So it looks as if some of that architectural style had an influence on more modest houses. So this here is the footpath you could take through the trees and onto Ponyfield Close, or if you were walking, you could carry on along Birkby Lodge Road and turn the corner, and you'd come to Birkby Fold, and you'd come to here, the almshouses, which are still there nowadays and were founded by Thomas Holroyd in 1830. At the time, they used to call it Birkby Lane End here, but we'll see Holroyd's house in a moment. Also, if you did go up to the top of the road, on the corner are these nice semi-detached houses. This is looking at them from the back, and they were planned to look like one property, and they sort of turned their backs onto the main road. They were designed by Edgar Wood as well. And the left-hand house from this point of view is Azo House. And the name Azo is because Joseph Turner, who I just mentioned, lived at Birkby Lodge, first had this house built for him. And he'd been the chief chemist at Reed Holiday, which developed the new Azo dyes. Now I'm going to zoom up the hill to the next place, which is actually very close if you were to walk across a field in the old days to the lodge. And this is an amazing 3D aerial view of Birkby Grange. The Grange was built in the mid-1700s and was once the home of the Thomas Holroyd, who founded the almshouses. He was a wealthy merchant and landowner, born in Elland in 1750. And when he died, he was a bachelor in 1833, and he left this that he called his mansion house, this lovely Georgian building here, and his warehouse to the side here, and outbuildings, and a large amount of land and property in and around Birkby, to a Thomas Robinson of Birkby, who was a wool stapler and son of an Elland cloth dresser. Holroyd also left money for the new Huddersfield Infirmary and to Seed Hill School, and he seems to have been quite a cultured man. He left pictures and musical instruments to people, and was also one of the founders of the Huddersfield Subscription Library. So we like him, don't we, Frank, as a
Absolutely. I think we need more such men to give more money to libraries.
Well, in those days, people had to subscribe. Now it's public, but it was a start. So several other wealthy Huddersfield people lived there until it became offices in more recent years. So in 1845, it was occupied by Thomas Wilson, the brewer, who'd recently sold the brewery we're going to look at down the hill. And in the 1890s, a Captain Joseph Taylor Armitage, son of the Joseph Armitage who died at Birkby Lodge, he lived there. And at about that time, in the late 1890s, it seems to have become known as Birkby Grange rather than Birkby Hall. And there was another rather well-known person at the time, this Thomas Pearson Crossland JP. This is him looking like a stiff and starchy Victorian gentleman. His father, the Tory MP T.P. Crossland, is the one who's remembered in the name of T.P. Woods at Gledholt. And just across the road from the Grange, in the past you would have seen this. The old house, once called Daisy Cottage, was demolished in the early 20th century. And the historian Philip Eyre thought it dated partly from Elizabethan times. So there has been speculation that a long time ago, it might have even been the hall that gave the name to the road. On old maps, it seems as if the building might have been 4 or 5 cottages, and it certainly might have housed workers at the Grange. Just adjoining it, lower down, and still here today, is the house where Mr. Fletcher lived with his family. He was a nurseryman, fruiterer and gardener, and lived and based his business here from about 1901 and for a lot of the 20th century. But this building also dates to the mid-1700s, so is another of the oldest ones in Birkby. The Fletchers used the fields that used to be behind the houses to grow their plants, And a lot of people remember them. The women of the family did things like dressmaking and preparing flowers for weddings. And at one time, there was a kind of cafe for refreshments here. And there's speculation that it might once have been the well-accustomed beer house known by the name of Birkby Gardens that was mentioned in the sale details of the brewery estate down the hill in 1874. If you were, there's a horse and cart here in this picture, and if you were to walk down the road, you can see a nice substantial old horse trough still there. So we're going to now walk down this hill, down Birkby Hall Road, past the garage and the old North Bank house that was once built for a local mill owner, we'll mention. And here we're going to near the double roundabouts in Birkby. And I'll zoom down so you can get a view of the old brewery. So there might once have been a couple of breweries in Birkby and a few beer houses. And this one probably dates to the 1700s. In 1842, a Thomas Wilson sold it to Thomas Macaulay. There's a Macaulay Street around the corner. And Macaulay was still called a brewer in 1874. But soon after this, when the buildings and land were sold, it was called the Birkby Old Brewery Estate. But there is a lovely photograph of it when it was a brewery, or maybe just after it had been a brewery, with the family that lived there. I think that's an amazing photo. That would be nowadays, if you were in the corner of the back garden, you could see that view. Nowadays, it's private houses there. And this is interesting, a sales plan of Birkby Brewery from 1901 that we have a copy of in the library. And it shows the buildings next to the brewery that are a house now. And this is farm buildings, and it might be the farm rented in the 1840s by a Joshua Hobson. Now, he was a journalist who published the Northern Star and later edited the Huddersfield Chronicle. He was a Chartist, believed in votes for working men, and what was known as a Tory radical who campaigned for reforms such as the 10-Hour Act that prevented children having to work more than 10 hours a day.
Oh dear. Was he also pals with Richard Ostler?
I think he will have known Richard Ostler, who was the well-known campaigner for better working conditions for children. And Richard Ostler just lived up the hill, of course, at Fixby Hall. So, but
thank God that it's over now. We don't have to campaign for things like that anymore.
Well, these children don't have to work more than 10 hours. He was a social reformer, this man. And so one of his interests was improving agricultural practices. And he had a model farm in Birkby for a while and is recorded as breeding a couple of prize pigs. He was influential in improving Huddersfield's sanitation too. And interestingly, he was one of the poor law guardians in Huddersfield at the time of that workhouse scandal in 1848. If we go just lower down Birkby Hall Road, you come to Crescent Road, and this house, which has a date on the side actually of 1789, and it was probably another old farmhouse. And if we were to walk down the hill, you could walk down this ginnel here, and that brings us out at our next stop on Norman Road. Now I'm going to pass over to you again, Frank.
Thank you very much, Lorna. I don't think we've got any questions, but I'm really jealous you only get to talk about the best bits, beer houses and stuff like that.
There's so many interesting places we could have chosen in Birkby, actually. We've only chosen a big, quick tour, a whiz around.
Well, now I'm on to shopping and also places of worship. So we'll see what happens. So I'm going to add my Google Earth view to stream, and I will take you to what used to be Birkby Old Co-op.
Well, it was Huddersfield Co-op, wasn't it? But it was a branch. It was the Birkby branch of it.
Yes. The history of cooperation is also one of social reform. Local communities came together to combine their buying power. This Birkby branch of the Huddersfield Co-op opened in 1901 and in 1910 had butchery and drapery departments. By 1937, drapery had given way to fish and fruit. Later, a yarn merchant called Peter Munt used the building. Another co-op, the Hill House Perseverance Friendly and Industrial Cooperative Society. I
It's a
can't even
great
pronounce
name,
the
that,
name.
isn't it? What a great name.
Well, I wish they used simpler names like Tesco or Asda. That would have been much easier for me. But well, that was the thing in those days. Today, it's probably too short. Anyway, this is just to tell you that there were various branches of various co-ops at different points in Birkby. We should briefly mention Norman Park, which is across the road from here and forms an important part of Birkby's heritage. Well, originally known as the Fartown Recreation Ground, it was opened to public in 1896. The name of the park shows how boundaries between places are often elastic and their perception can change with time. And a similar thing that I'm going to show you soon will be about Teapot Chapel, which also used to be called Hill House Methodist Chapel. So there is things that are just on the boundary, and sometimes they're perceived as being part of one area, and other times they're part of another area. There is a listed war memorial there in Norman Park that was erected in 1921 with a life-size bronze figure of an infantryman, a memorial to those from the Fartown and Birkby district who died in the First World War, with a later inscription added, remembering those who died in the Second World War and all subsequent conflicts. This aerial photo shows the park and Middlemost Mills with its mill pond. And now back to shopping. Let me take you further along Norman Road to the side of the former Jubb's shop, as shown on this photo from 1904. It has recently been Zanham's Sweet Shop and Cafe on the corner of Crescent Road and Blacker Road. And now we'll move a little up Blacker Road to the site of one of Birkby's mosques. So far, we have been talking about the poor, social reformers, farmers, welfare residents, but little has been said about migrants who have significantly shaped the social fabric of modern Birkby. The Birkby area has been transformed by post-war migration, initially from Europe, including countries such as Poland, Ukraine and Italy, and later on in mid-60s from South Asia, from the mid-50s, from South Asia, the Caribbean and other countries. As different groups made Birkby their home, they started establishing their clubs, businesses and places of worship. The mosque on Blacker Road was opened in 1981 by Sunni Muslims of the Deobandi movement. The building was extended several times and can accommodate up to 1,000 worshippers, as well as providing community space for Arabic classes, a function hall and funeral service. Well, originally, it used to be the Palladium, one of Huddersfield's early silent film cinemas, which opened in 1914, just before the start of the First World War, with seating for 500 people. Following the growing popularity of talking pictures in the 1930s, the site was demolished and a new two-story structure was erected on the foundations. Reopened in 1937, the building with cantilever balcony and double seats was renamed the Carlton. The cinema closed in 1954 as the TV industry grew. It briefly became a bingo hall. And now, shopping again. Blacker Road has for a long time been a busy shopping street. Just opposite the mosque on Blacker Road, near the hardware and DIY shop, was the first Baptist chapel in Birkby. You can see the arched windows on the right-hand side of this picture. As the Baptist congregation grew, it relocated to a new church designed by Garside and Pennington, which opened in 1910 on Wheat House Road. It is now a Buddhist centre offering meditation classes.
It is a lovely building, that. I came across it in the dark the other day with the light shining through the windows, and it looked lovely, that building.
It is, yeah, and I remember it very well. I used to live opposite opposite the building when I first came to Huddersfield. So far we've just covered almost all the world's religions, apart from Judaism. And of course, there was at one point a small synagogue in Huddersfield. But we're still going to mention another iconic building, which is now a mosque, and that is Teapot Chapel. Well, what was known locally as the Teapot Chapel, and designed by John Kirk and Sons, it was built as the Hill House United Free Methodist Chapel in 1873-4 by a breakaway group from the Brunswick Street Chapel in Huddersfield. Well, in Methodism, there used to be lots of breakaway groups, and its nickname probably derives from the ornamental urn at the top of the gable. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so that you can see the urn at the top. The members of the chapel were known as teapotters, and as well as services, there were many community activities held there. And on this picture from 1910, which I rather like, you can see the children playing outside. However, the chapel closed in 1962. As this photo from 1964 shows, it was very run down. It was possibly to reopen as a Church of England parish hall, but the plan failed to materialize. Teapot Chapel was eventually bought by local Sunni Muslims of the Barelvi movement in 1976 and was adapted into a teapot mosque. Here we can see the representatives of the Asian community inspecting the site. Like mosque on Blacker Road, it holds various religious education classes for children and adults during the week. The domes and minarets were added during the recent renovation, which has transformed this building into an appealing local landmark. There are now facilities over 3 floors and new lifts to improve access.
They've done a really good job of renovations there, haven't they? It is lovely.
It is very nice. It is very nice, and it's really worth it just doing the walk yourself and see the building with your own eyes.
And I think they do welcome in normal non-COVID times. They do welcome school groups and things to go and have a look inside as well. And they've got a good website.
Stan, question time.
Well, my questions are more comments. I love all the combination of the slow Google Earth swoop in, and that 3D view really gives you a much clearer view than you do of an aerial view that you often get in Google Maps. So I think, it adds that extra dimensions, of course. God, that's so obvious. And, use of the old photographs and old maps just to give a picture of how it was and how it still is in your mind's eye underneath it all. And the same applies to the buildings. I love the continuous use of buildings, like the Masjid Riza, the Teapot Chapel. You can see the original there. They've had some subtle ones. The one that was the Umar, Masjid Umar, the Umar Mosque. The change from the old cinema to the modern one is so completely different and quite shocking, really. But of course, you don't know that thing. And yes, in some ways, it's still got the feelings of a big old cinema there.
But the bones of the Carlton are still
exactly, yeah. And now it's used for a different kind of spiritual experience. So no, that's good. Thank you very much for that. And
Thank you very much.
Any people out there with any comments, just put something little on comments or questions. Put something little, type it in, and if you can, of course, if you're going to be on Google Mail and all that business, and we'll forward it on and we'll do it. Oh, something's come up here. From a Michael Lynch. Yes, very interesting insight into an area I've driven through and walked or ran through many a time, and a big thumbs up from him.
Thank you, Stan, for your valuable comments. And I'll just hand over to Lorna for the last leg of our journey. Over to you, Lorna.
Hiya. I'm just going to go a short distance now from where we were at the, now I'm going to share my screen. We were here at the Masjid Riza, and what we've done is we've walked along back Beacon Street or Beacon Street, and this is Beacon Street here with the curve, and we're looking down on this clump of trees here. The patch of trees on the mound might not look very special, but excitingly, it does seem to be one of Huddersfield's oldest historic sites, what is thought to be a Norman motte. It's quite near the entrance to the car park for the showrooms for deluxe beds that are there now. And on old maps, you see that it's shown very clearly as a mound or a physical feature in the landscape with footpaths. Now, after the invasion of 1066, the Normans built a lot of motte and bailey structures, usually with a wooden structure on the top of the motte. And archaeologists have had a look at this area and suspect that there would have been a big bailey, this outer area for people to live in, that would have followed the curve of Beacon Street and stretched to where the mosque is now. But in the old days, historian George Redmonds writes about how the old motte was called Ark Hill Mound, and says there was once a beer house near it called Noah's Ark. It was run by somebody called Aquila Priestley, which I love. And this is a photo that was taken in 1863 of the beer house, which was built 50 years before that. Another beer house, sorry, Frank. I think in those days, beer would have been healthier than tap water sometimes. You know, they wouldn't have had taps, they'd have had pumps.
Well, I mean, people kept themselves really busy. They either worked, or they had to, or they went to church or to a beer house. There were only these two options, I guess: church or a beer house.
Maybe both for some people. So there's no record of a beacon being lit on Beacon Hill, but you can imagine how it would have been a good place. If you get the chance, have a walk around there, because there's a great view. And looking down on this mill area of Bay Hall, there were at one time about 3 mills there, spinning yarn and making woolen cloth. And at various times there's been a dye plant, a cloth finisher, a card clothing manufacturer, an organ builder for all those church organs. And in the 20th century, there was a manufacturer of metal windows around here. And they used to have a couple of tiny mill ponds. So if you were walking now, there are some steps down next to the bed factory that take you down onto this road here. It's that Milne Road. And what I'm going to do now is zoom down the hill to have a closer look at the mills. So this mill, Bay Hall Mills, still produces yarn as part of Chimera. It's still called Stork Brothers by local people, and it was founded by the Stork Brothers in 1863. In fact, there is a date on the top there. During the construction of it, a labourer died trying to hoist up a large iron beam. They didn't have as good health and safety in those days. As well as these mills and Clough House Mill, there had been that earlier woolen mill I spoke about near Spains Road that might have been before that a mill to mill wood or corn, or both at some certain points. There's a lot of good information online on Underground History's website about the history of local mills. Now in this one here, this photograph shows 1909 when they had an awful fire at the mill. There was a nasty fire there in 1909 and nobody was injured, we don't think, but 100 workers were laid off afterwards. Interestingly, this photo shows, shows people standing on the grassy area where there are some 20th century houses now next to these shrubs. And I think the stream passed across this grassy area. And it's really interesting to think how the streams, which are nowadays mostly hidden in culverts, would have been sources of water for all the stages of textile production and for the brewing, the farms, the orchards and the gardens, and children would have played in them. I spoke to an elderly man who remembered paddling in this stream as a child. The yarn they make, when Chimera they take it to their mills at Meltham and make it into furnishing fabric. Did I mention that? That's used for London transport. So it gets well used still nowadays. So we're going to go just a little bit along the road here now, past the Armitage Arms, another pub that's stayed there since Victorian times. And we're going to come to this Bay Hall area. So I'll zoom round. Here we go. And we're looking down from the air on the old Bay Hall building. It's also interesting to think about how the stream runs underneath here and curves around where these trees are. And if you look at an old map, we're still talking about streams for a moment. This is a map from about 1851, a town plan of Huddersfield, which includes this area. And you can see the old Bay Hall buildings, the newer Bay Hall buildings with their fancy gardens, and the old tan pits, because it looks as if the Brooke family, who once lived here, may have been tanners tanning leather. So this is the old building that gave its name to the whole area around, dates to the mid-1500s, or perhaps earlier. And it's one of the few obviously timber frame buildings in Huddersfield. The name probably comes from the fact that its oak frame structure is one bay or section. And when it was surveyed, they found a rare fire hood, which was partly timber framed and used to help extract smoke, not quite so safe as nowadays. Now, the historian George Redmond describes a lease from John Byron, who was the lord of the manor for a long time, from about 1318 till 1572. And he had a lease to a man called John Brooke for half of the manor or hall place called Bay Hall. And the lease included half the fruit growing in the orchard and some arable, meadow and pasture. And John Brooke, interestingly, had to make it defensible and find an able man sufficiently horsed and harnessed to attend upon John Byron in the event of war. So we don't think it was ever a manor house, but it may have been a kind of administrative building for the manor and acted as a kind of court at times. The Ramsden family bought the hall in 1845 and they rebuilt parts of it in 1856 and 1895. When St John's Church was first built, it was used for a while as a Sunday school, I think. Now, just across the lane from it, if you're there, this is the newer Bay Hall, which is probably an 18th century building. This shows ladies playing croquet on the lawn and people in fancy clothes and a top hat outside the front door. And this is now, there's a sort of car park in front of it. Oops, that was the map. And now I'm going to just move on to our very last stop, which is just, if you were walking, just through a little ginnel at the end of that lane, and you come out here next to this building, which of course used to be Ben Shaw's. Having established his firm in 1871, Benjamin Shaw leased land at Willow Lane in 1892, and he wanted to erect one of the finest mineral manufactories in the kingdom. Before the First World War, they sometimes had 35 horses used for deliveries in the area, and they always decorated them for May Day. But by 1953, there were just 2 horses left. This might be them. There were Duke and Sherry left. There you can see their sign at the side on Willow Lane. They were the first company in Europe to can soft drinks in 1959, and the business was eventually sold, although I think you can still get Ben Shaw's drinks in cans. The brand is still going. And the premises were used by Britvic for some time. And now some of those...
It goes very well with fish and chips, Lorna.
Oh, yes. Well, you know, they advertise that on their website. They've got an amazing video showing that Ben Shaw's pop and fish and chips is great. Of course,
we went to Anglesey the other day and they actually had Ben Shaw's cans. So.
Oh, you saw them there. Yeah. And of course, it was a time when they founded it, when temperance movement was quite strong. And that's so correct. Instead of drinking all the beer, people were drinking pop instead. And other soft drinks. I used to love dandelion and burdock. So just along Willow Lane, if you were to walk a bit further down, it is quite interesting. Before we come back to our beginnings, I'm going to try and use this street view to walk along. Oh, it's slow, but just behind the trees here, you can see that there's the remains of an old railway bridge. Don't know if people have noticed it walking through Birkby. And the stream, of course, that came from Bay Hall comes underneath the road here, near where these trees are, and winds underneath that old railway arch. That's the remains of the Midland Railway branch line that was used to transport coal from the Newtown Goods Yard. And the Newtown Goods Yard was where Dunelm and Aldi, that area is now, to the gasworks on Leeds Road and to the electricity power station when that started. And the line opened in 1910 and ran 4.5 miles to Lower Hopton Junction near Mirfield. But now it's the Greenway, and if you go up here to the left, you can walk or cycle along the Greenway as far as Mirfield, using the canal banks as well. That Newtown to Red Doles section closed in 1968, and if you turn round now and walk up Willow Lane, you'll see the newest brewery, the Magic Rock, by the corner there, the newest Birkby brewery, and then we're back to St John's where we started. So,
oh, that's lovely. That's great, Lorna. Thank you. So Lorna is going for a pint, and I'm going to church.
Well, I'm also the contrast of that last picture, the contrast of the kind of building style. You know, we've had this lovely old breweries, and we've got this overly Anglican, overly Gothic kind of church in the distance, and you got this square prefab building that could be anywhere really. But I've heard good things about the Magic Rock, but you know, on the outside, it wouldn't want to drag me in, whereas I'd actually go into the church.
Okay. So at this point, I'd like to thank everybody for watching. And as we mentioned at the beginning, this walk will stay on Kirklees Library's YouTube and Facebook after this live session. So please spread the word among those who have missed it today. Don't forget to subscribe to Kirklees Library's YouTube channel so that you can follow updates of our future endeavours. Our thanks for the images we have used today go especially to West Yorkshire Archives, the Kirklees Image Archive and Heritage England. And thanks to Discover Huddersfield for their partnership in the production of our Birkby Trail.
We should also give a plug, Frank, to Huddersfield Exposed, which is a great website if you want to have a look for information. There's the Kirklees Image Archive you can search online, and lots of
very recommended. Yeah.
And you also mentioned in passing Alan Brooks' site, Underground Histories.
Underground Histories, I think. Yeah.
Correct.
Alan Brooks got lots of information.
It's not all local, but a lot of it is. A lot of it is both political and social, as well as particular architectural. So yeah.
So there is lots of information online, and you can actually research that by clicking on the links in our Google Earth tour. And you will be able to access this tour so that you can revisit some of the sites at your own pace or find inspiration to build your own walk. So we will provide a link that will appear under our broadcast and on Kirklees Library's social media in a few days. You need to use Google Chrome as your internet browser and on your computer. To view the tour on your smartphone, you need to download a Google Earth app first. Please contact us if you'd like to develop a similar walk around your area and give an online talk on any aspect of Kirklees area's history. We would also like to extend the scope of our events beyond Huddersfield town, and so we especially welcome contributions from other parts of Kirklees. And finally, we would like to invite you to our next virtual walk, which is on Wednesday, 21st of October at 6 p.m, led by Natalie Pinnock-Hamilton and Heather Norris-Nicholson as part of the wider programme of events to mark the Black History Month. And that's everything from me today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching. Have you got something, Stan?
Well, I've only just there's a few people saying thank you, so I thought we'd give them a name check. MB says hi, and that is so cool. Kath Pike says, fantastic tour, thank you. Christopher Flanagan, thank you for a great virtual tour of Birkby. And Mary Poulton, thank you so much, which is actually what we should say to everybody involved. Thank you so
for
much.
watching. It's been
Thank you, yeah.
interesting.
And see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.